Hello and welcome back to 2020's virtual Monsterama. Thank you for joining us. My name is Darren Bush. I'm the co-director of the Lit track this year at Monsterama. We are talking tonight about the big, scary, hairy business of horror writing. Before we get into our topic, I'm going to have our esteemed authors introduce themselves. I'm going to pick on this gentleman here first. Blue, if you'll introduce yourself to our audience.
Hey everybody, my name is Blue Cole. I'm a genre author. Got a couple of releases out and looking forward to the panel.
Excellent. Bobby?
I am Bobby Nash. I am a writer. Write all kinds of genres. I like to bounce around a good bit. So yeah, this is my stuff.
Very, very professional introductions,
Yes.
gentlemen. Thank you. So I'm also technically a science fiction and fantasy author. I have been published by strangers, which is one of those first big hurdles you got to get over. We'll talk more about that later, but for right now, what we really are getting into, actually, no, before we do that, let me mention a couple things. We are short a couple of fabulous genre authors at the moment. We might be interrupted by one of them. We might be running a couple of minutes late, so I apologize if that happens. If it doesn't, I really apologize because I wanted his input on this. We will see what happens. So it's all part of the fun of pre-recording panels for Monsterama. So
real panels happen that way too. Someone comes in
yeah,
late.
yeah. It is
right for the late, yeah.
It's no shock at all that we all are willing to admit we've been late for panels. No matter how hard we try to be early, it happens sometimes.
Sometimes
but anyway,
it's hard to just get away from your table, you know?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It appears that we really don't want to have the actual panel that we were planning, but we're ready to go here, guys. So the big, scary, hairy business of horror writing, we're also, this is Monsterama, so we're talking about, this conversation is going to lean toward horror writing and monster writing. We're really also talking about science fiction and fantasy. I believe that the conversation we're about to have that leans toward Monsterama's genres, I think it's going to help anybody who's an aspiring genre writer, regardless of the genre. But we will, of course, occasionally dip into some specifics. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try a little experiment tonight. We're actually going to start with the end of the panel, and we're going to work our way backwards to the beginning. So here we go. The end of this discussion, according to the fabulous Mr. Nash, is you have a book. It's been published. It's printed and ready to go. That's the goal. Is
in your hand.
Right. You have a book. You have been published by, again, the way I put it is you've been published by people that don't know you, except working on your book with you. And we're going to try and talk, regardless of whether we're talking small, middle, or big five publishing. We're going to try and have this information be sort of universal for being published, but occasionally we may have to get into some details about the differences. We'll see how that goes. So Bobby, this was kind of your idea here. So let me start by asking you, why is I have this book in my hand, why is that the moment? Why is that the way you describe the end of this conversation? I'm curious why you picked that phrase.
Well, when I first started, one of my goals, because it's very important for us to set goals, and for those, not just one goal, multiple goals. But, obviously my first goal was finish writing a book. But the first big goal for me was to get published. And I admit, in the early days, I didn't know what to do beyond that point. So I had to learn a lot, and a lot of the stuff I've learned has been stuff I've learned on the go. It's been from either screwing something up and learning a valuable lesson, or from spending time with others who do what I do and learning from them. And, certainly panels and conventions are an incredible way to do that. Like, I've learned a lot from sitting on panels with other authors, hearing how they handled things or things like that. So, but having that book in your hand, that is the end of a step in the journey. And it's a very important step. And it's I can't speak for you guys, but the moment that my first novel showed up on my doorstep and I opened that box, I had a grin that you couldn't wipe off my face for a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. So it's a very but so it's a very big step in the process. There's a lot of stuff you have to do after that, because really, as we were talking beforehand, a lot of times that's when the real work starts. But I thought it'd be interesting for people to know the options. There are so many ways to get that book published, and we could spend a whole panel talking about, do you want to self-publish, small press? It's all that stuff. So here we go. We've got the book. What at that point? Yeah. And then
and the funny thing about it is, regardless of if you're with a small publisher, mid-list, anybody but biggest of the big five, you're going to be doing a lot of the business side of it. You're going to be doing a lot of the marketing, a lot of the pushing. So just getting the book in your hand, do you think it's the end of your journey? Nope. It's the very next step. It's the first step.
Even the big five now, they're expecting you to do the lion's share of the marketing.
Correct.
And if you're in this business for if you find some success and you're in this business for any length of time, it's not just like, so you write one book, you market it, you write the next book, it comes out, you're still marketing that first book too. And when you get out and you've got 5, 6, 8, 10, 20 books, you're still marketing all of them.
So
that's one of the big things that I never realized was that even though I wrote a book, say in 2014, someone can pick it up in 2020 and go, oh, look at this new book. It's been out since 2014, but because I'm still talking about it and still promoting it and still pushing it, it is still creating sales and creating income for me.
Yep. So what I would love to find out is that our audience at Monsterama would be interested in more panels about the marketing and the business side of it after you have a box full of your own books, which I have to admit, I have not published a novel, but just even seeing someone purchase one of my short stories on the Kindle and seeing that on the little spreadsheet is, that's a grin that doesn't wipe off for a couple of days, just there. So I appreciate the couple of weeks of, I tell people, just don't talk to me after I've put something out, because I'm kind of insufferable for a little while. So I'm hoping that in the future we can have more discussions like this about that side of it. But what we're going to do is we're going to take that box of books and work backwards. So let's start with the most obvious thing, which is, what is a good, reasonable expectation? And this might be an unfair question. What's a reasonable expectation for how many books are in that box for your first novel?
It depends on your publisher. Every publisher has a different, it's in your contract. You will be given X number. And it's different from publisher to publisher. I work for some where you get one. Some you get 2, some you get 20. It just depends on the publisher. But they also most publishers allow you to purchase at cost as well. So for people like me and in Blue too, we do a lot of conventions. We're probably buying books because we're going to be at conventions. And it's important to know also, if you're buying books from your publisher at cost and selling them, those books do not count as sales to the publisher.
Correct. Yeah.
You can sell it because they're not making any money off of it. So it doesn't count. So even if I go and sell 100, that 100 does not count toward what the publisher sold.
And the method and the term to use for that is called hand selling, because you're literally handing a book to a person. And the majority of my sales, 75% of them, come from hand sales at conventions. And that's where you have the booth and a reader walks by and you say, hey, what do you like to read? And unless you're one of the big five and the mid to top list of the big five, that's probably how you're going to sell the majority of your books, is hand selling. Or through someone that you meet and then they go and buy them in the next week or so after the convention or after the writers conference or after the speech that you gave at the library. They're going to go to your website and look at your stuff. So those hand sales, unless you're one of the big guys, that's probably going to be how you sell most of what you sell.
The publishers are happy to let us do that and keep that, that profit, because technically that's part of our marketing. because
right.
not everybody, as you know, when you go to a convention, it's easy to go broke really quick. A lot of people come by our tables and see the books, hear us at panels, whatever. They go, "Ooh, that's good, but I'm broke." When they get their next paycheck, if you've given them something to take home with them, then they go to Amazon or your website or the publisher's website or whatever and buy a copy. Those will count toward the sales. But so we're actually, even though we're doing selling it by hand, we're also marketing, which the publisher is happy with.
And so those post-con deals are the best thing that you can do. As a writer, one of the things you want to do is to have bookmarks and give away. I mean, I just dug in, and this is an old cover from my first novel from 2014, but I still had some in my drawer beside me because this is what you hand out. Anybody that walks by my table, I'm like, "Hey, would you like a bookmark?" They're good for lots of things, marking books, cutting up cocaine, using as a fingernail, a fingernail cleaner. You try to engage with the readers to make them remember you and hopefully go back and look at your books later.
So this is where I say that the opinions of Blue Coal do not reflect the opinions of Monsterama or its subsidiaries.
And that's
just
what
in
they're
case.
telling you.
That's
not true.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So let's back up a second because you guys said something that threw me off. The publisher doesn't consider it part of their sales to sell you a copy of the book. But I thought the publishers kept track of how many books they printed. Now I know, of course,
it all depends again on the publisher, but so they know how many are out there. But see, the way they count sales, what counts as an honest to goodness sale is the thing they're going to pay us the royalty on. They're not going to turn around and they're not going to sell us books at cost. Let us collect, keep the difference and then pay us a royalty on that on top of it. Because if they did, every author would buy thousands of copies of their own book because we would make royalties off of it. And that's they don't want to pay us twice.
Well, you see, it's funny you say that because I have a couple of times I've bought my own Kindle book just to see what it looked like on my Kindle, because otherwise it doesn't, it's hard to see what it looks like. You got to take somebody else's phone and sneak on there and buy your own book. It doesn't work. So I've bought my own work on the Kindle, and then of course that cuts into my profits, which are minuscule anyway. It's not like I'm complaining, but I just think it's funny that in my math I forgot to calculate the cost of me buying my own book in order to actually see what it looked like and hold it in my hand, if you will, electronically. Yeah. So okay, so you guys bring up a very good point, which is you're already talking about the necessity for a book cover that suits your book, the elevator pitch, which is a way to, if people aren't at your table, if they catch you in the hall on the way to a panel, then you want to have a really quick, easy way to get their attention that leads to book sales. There's also the blurbs, and I've completely forgotten what the technical term is, but getting other authors to put their names on the back of your book. Bobby's book was awesome, signed famous author.
Author blurbs, yeah.
Is that an author blurb? Okay. I apologize for not having done enough homework. So at what point in, and we're talking about novels here for sake of this panel, in what point in the novel writing process do you recommend, or do you personally start getting into that thought process? Does that come with the initial idea of a novel, or do you kind of try and put that off until the end? Where do those sorts of ideas start to come in?
For me, it literally starts at the beginning. As I'm writing my first draft, I'm thinking about the elevator pitch. A girl and her brother have to survive feral humans. That is just something. And honestly, as you're drafting the novel, those little quick one-sentence synopsi are what you need to be writing down, because you will never remember it again. So if you're drafting it, you have a perfect 2-sentence description of your book. Write that stuff down, because you're going to need it when you go into your marketing plan.
Okay.
It's just like when filmmakers are making their movie and they go, "Ooh, that's going to be in the trailer."
Yeah.
It's the book equivalent of that. Yeah.
So but Bobby, you bring up a very good point, which is if you think about movie makers and trailers, a lot of people are familiar with how trailers, the experience of watching a trailer in the movie theater, right? There's a lot of useful information here, because you go to a movie and you can tell how the studios think this movie attracts an audience by the trailers. Because if you go to a Star Wars movie or a Star Trek movie, you're going to get science fiction trailers and some other stuff too. If you go to 50 Shades of Grey, which I have never done in the theater, I have no idea what trailers you're going to get, but I'm sure they're not spaceships and aliens blowing up and explosion-y things. So that's part of what you guys are talking about is I would hope that pretty early in the novel writing process, you would be able to blurb where you're going with this, right? I would
because that's our movie trailer. I mean, that's our trailer. The back cover of the book.
Very good.
Yep.
So we have to, and there are instances. I mean, certainly there are some publishers where I have no say over that. But a lot of publishers do ask for our input on writing the back cover copy. They may edit it and change it to, because publishers have what's the word I'm looking for? They do things their own way. So there's a consistency when you're working with publishers. They do things a certain way. Like if you look at any book, 3 or 4 books from the same publisher, you'll notice consistencies in design. So a lot of times you have to adapt to fit that. But we as authors can offer that stuff to help them. They don't always take it, but we can give them, here's what I was thinking for the back cover copy, or here's what I was thinking for the description we're going to put on Amazon when we sell it, or whatever. So we can help that way, but it's, at some point, depending on the publisher, it may not be up to us.
Yeah, the publishers, when and the bigger the publisher, the more autonomous they tend to be. They have the staff and the people on hand, and really a lot of times the expertise to say, you know what, we know that this is going to work because it's worked the last 10 times that the bigger the publisher, the less freedom and autonomy that you have. But when we're going back to the blurb and the elevator pitch and how you describe your book to readers, that's the same thing you're going to pitch to editors, because an editor wants to hear that hook to where you grab them and pull them in. So as you're writing whatever you're writing, you need to be writing down those 1 or 2 sentence things that come to you, because you're going to use that repeatedly. I mean, I have 1 or 2, I can give you 1 line for each of the books that I have published that are sitting on my table. And if you go, ooh, then I can go into more details about, oh, well, it has this and it has that, and it does this, and this happens. But it all starts with that 1 line, because that is what the reader or the editor is going to key on if you can present it in the right way.
Yeah, which actually, Blue, almost answers my next question, which is the elevator pitch is something that as a writer, I have been forced to get used to the idea that it is one of those things you have to have. It's not an option. I personally don't like them, but that's just me. I'm coping. But the real question is, when do you need the elevator pitch? You can't wait until the whole novel's done, can you?
No, you're
okay. Okay, so I got some very strong opinions coming. Blue, you go first. When do you feel like you need the elevator pitch to exist and be ready to go?
When I want to talk to somebody else about the novel. And usually I'm thinking an editor. If I'm at a convention and I see an editor come out of the doorway, oh, hey, Tony, how you doing? How you been? How's the family? How's this? And it's to the business side, oh, well, I had this novel that 1 sentence. And I'm going to go, okay, or, hey, that sounds pretty cool. So you have it, I mean, almost from the beginning. And honestly, that 1 sentence will help with the reader. And 2, as a writer, it helps you, because I guarantee you, if you're writing a novel, okay, and you've gotten through your first 2/3 of it, you're hitting that middle slog, and you're like, oh, God, what direction am I going in? What comes next? Come back to that 1 sentence, because that is your story in a nutshell. That is the direction that you want to go. And that's what you fall back on when everything when it gets hard, because writing a novel obviously is not easy. So when it gets hard, even you will use that elevator pitch to inspire and re-inspire yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Plus, as we mentioned too, we are writing is a very you're by yourself, but we are always at conventions. We're doing online things. We're doing podcasts. But when you're at conventions or at functions, events, there's networking going on. So even though I'm in the process of writing a book, I'm nowhere near ready to shop around. I may talk to a publisher or an editor I know who works for a publisher, and we're just talking, and they're like, "Hey, what are you working on?"
Mm-hmm.
You can explain quickly what you're working on, because they may go, "You know what? That sounds great. I'd love to look at it when you're done."
Mm-hmm.
So you're not only thinking about what you're working on, you're thinking ahead, because the business has changed from the days where you wrote a story, you handed it to the editor, and you didn't see it again until it came out. Those days are gone. Publishers are expecting more and more out of us as the authors in terms of pre-promotion. While I'm writing a book, I'm promoting it. Not in the you've got to buy this, but in the hey, unless it's top secret. There are times you can't talk about what you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
But when I can, my social media posts might be, man, I had a good writing day today, and I'll take a snapshot of the
Screen,
desktop at an angle so you can't read a whole lot, but it gets people, you get to talking about the book you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets people interested because they're just following your progress. And then they'll see you at a convention and go, how's that book going you've been talking about? So you've already started promoting while you're working on the book. And then when you go to, and let's say there's two different ways to do it with publishers too. You either submit and hope they'll take it, or they've hired you, or just said, we want you to do this. If you're submitting, or when they say we want this book, a lot of times in that part of the process, which I guess is like your job interview, they're going to ask you before they will accept the book, do you have a marketing plan? That is now so integral to what we do that we have to have plans for that before we even to help sell the book. And so now you have to start thinking about that stuff a lot sooner. And in terms of the kind of story you're writing, is there something that can be a merchandise thing, especially if you still own the thing? The publisher may just want publishing rights, but if you're like, man, I got this cool character that would be an awesome plush figure, you can start thinking those things. And you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself, but you can start putting ideas in your head. You can start coming up with taglines for when you make social media posts or posters or whatever. There's all that stuff you can start thinking of. And a lot of times, what Blue said, it comes out of you actually writing it and go, that's a tagline, this piece of dialogue, that's a tagline. Let me make a note. And you start planning as you go.
Yeah, I want to get a little bit technical here. And my personal way of doing this, whenever I think of something like what you're describing, oh yeah, I got to write that down, is I'll just go, basically the first page of all of my rough drafts is the notes about the rough draft. Taglines would go in there, any kind of blurb idea. So what happens is the first thing that happens when I get done writing a story is I've got to transfer just the story into my manuscript template, because if I did Control A and copied the whole thing over, it would include a couple of pages of my talking to myself in the future, right? Those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So you talk about taglines. I have to ask this. I have to break for just a second and ask this. Have either of you ever discussed, either in social media or in some other setting, something that later you took out of one of your books? Kind of like that movie trailer that's got a scene that isn't actually in the movie. Have you ever had that experience?
Sometimes in edits that happens. I do a serialized novel on my Patreon page, and I always put it there. Now, this hasn't gone through edits yet. This chapter could be completely different when it goes into book form, because you sometimes lose a little control when it goes to edits, and I don't say that in a bad way. Your editor is not your enemy. Your editor is there to help you make the best book possible. And sometimes as authors, we're too close to see it. You know, we're in love with every word we've put down. By the time it's done, in the middle of it, we hate every word we've put down. But by the end, we're in love with all of it. And so sometimes we don't see that this doesn't make sense or this detracts from something. And so a lot of times your editor will come in and go, we need to lose this. And that's where your relationship between the writer and editor comes in real handy, because you work together to make this the best thing it can be. And yes, there are times whole chapters have come out.
Yep.
So Blue, what about you?
Yeah, that goes back to the whole kill your darlings trope that all writers throw out. But, you know, it's a trope for a reason, because it's true. Usually you can chop off the first chapter of most pre-edited novels and still get close to the inciting action. If your editor says you need to move this and you say, I don't want to, but they dig their heels in, you probably need to listen to them. One of the best things I did was on my newest novel was to listen to my editor and listen to her about a particular point, and it really made the novel stronger. And you're always going to be fixing and editing and stuff. In fact, I've had a novel out for a couple of years that I just got the rights back to, and I'm gonna republish it myself under my own. I'm gonna publish it in house, and I'm gonna retcon a pretty big detail. But you know what? I realized the first iteration of it didn't work, and it's going to be a better story for the second one. And I got my damn rights back, so I can do what I want to, and that's just it. So yeah, you always go back and change it and fix stuff and make it better, because at the end of the day, does it make the story better? If it does, you need to listen to it and be willing to put your ego aside and realize the story serves all.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there are times that there's stuff that we write, and it's not that it's bad, it just doesn't help the story. You know, a lot of times that's that stuff where we're in love with these characters, so we write them doing something that doesn't really, you know, it's cool, we love it, but it doesn't move the story.
And the thing about it is, you have to think that the editor, I am one writer. I can only do one story at a time. This editor, who has been an English professor for years, has seen dozens, if not hundreds of writers. And so she knows what is better for your story than you do in your little head, because she has seen so much. And when you're this close to something, it's real hard to see around it. Well, that's what the editor does for you. And in my case, she tightens it and she makes it more concise and makes it more action driven and less passive. And while I'm in love with the passivity, because that's where the true feeling and the true story comes out. But she's like, no, you need to do this, and listen to her.
Yeah. So let's talk about the editor in terms of what we're getting to here with this panel, which is the goal. The goal is for your novel to be professionally edited, right? And no writer alive is their own best editor. I think that's just a fact of life.
Right.
It's just one of those unfortunate truths. So we've talked about the end product is an edited novel in your hand, and you guys have mentioned about like the elevator pitch as it relates to attracting an editor that's interested in your story. Where does the editor begin to become actually involved in your rough draft manuscript? Is it in the middle? Is it at the end of the writing? Where do you guys want to insert an editor and get them started on looking at your work?
It really depends on your relationship. If you have written several novels in a row and you have used the same editor several times in a row, she is going to come up with, or he is going to come up with, they're going to start to train you as a writer, and you're going to kind of start to change your methodology just slightly to come up with a better product. So honestly, they have less work. But it's not so that they have less work. It's so that you are a better writer. You're going to start to the action. You're going to not put in so many damn commas. You're going to do the little tricks that if your editor brings something up to you 3 or 4 times and you don't change it, you're the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to use as many, cut out the wases. I get that one a lot. Too many wases, too many of those,
Mhm.
but that's only part of it. I mean, a lot of people when they
Yeah.
hear editor, their first thought is grammar, and while that is part of it, and some publishers will have an editor and a proofreader.
Mhm.
It just depends on the size of the publisher, but an editor, more important than catching the grammar, is the editor is there when they go, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. I got lost right here. So if they got lost, it's a good bet somebody else is going to get lost. Or
Yeah.
you could make, oh, I like this. Have you thought about you can maybe make it more powerful if you did it this way. So your editor is really great for helping you do things to make it so that when the reader reads it, the story is as powerful as it can be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're about at the halfway point here. I wanted to see if this makes sense to you guys. A professional editor is a professional reader. So if you have lost in your story someone who reads for a living, then your fans are probably going to get lost too. Is that a
Possibly,
fair
yeah.
that
Yeah.
might be an oversimplification, but it occurs to me that might be a useful way to look at it, is if the editor is truly concerned about the way a story lays out or the order in which things happen, they've got a lot of experience dealing with different, like as Blue said earlier, with lots of different writers and lots of different writing styles. And I guess it makes sense to emphasize that they're not there to tell you that you're wrong. They're
Mhm.
there to make you better at what you are already doing.
Yes, we have the same goal:
Mhm.
make the best book possible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But one of the things that authors have to realize is not everyone has the same experience as you.
Mhm.
Not everybody's seen the same TV show that you're referencing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not everyone knows this obscure fact that you feel so clever because you put in there, and people read it and go, I don't get that.
Mhm.
That is also another sounding board to remind me that I'm not as clever as I think I am.
Oh
you
yeah.
know
Yeah.
and so it's really all about, because you're writing, ideally you're writing books for that could be read the world over, so there are things that you kind of have to watch out for, certain ways of doing things or whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's just about making the best book possible.
I
And
go ahead, Blue. Go ahead.
one of the things too is if you are looking for an editor, you need to be very specific. What kind of editor do you want? Do you want a developmental editor who's going to pick out the plot holes, who's going to say that your characterizations are off? Or are you looking for a proofreader that's going to find there, there, and there, 2 and 2? Are you looking for a line editor that is going to make sure that your formatting is correct? And so you really need to know what your need is before you go out and find one or hire one. And when you listen to somebody give you advice on your story, you need to figure out where they are coming from.
Hmm.
I sat down in one of those first pages panel, God, maybe my second convention. And this writer, a colleague of mine, a fellow writer, sit there and just picked apart my entire first page. And I started to get really upset about it at first. And because she just kept saying, oh, well, this doesn't work and this doesn't work. But then she'd go, well, but that's not quite wrong. Or, that's not quite there. But at the same time, I was able to take a step back and realize, well, she's looking at it from a line editor perspective rather than a developmental editor that opens up the door. Now, a lot of what she was saying was correct in the context, but if you're just reading the first 2 or 3 pages of a manuscript, it's real hard to get a sense of the entire novel. And that is what they were wanting to do, but that wasn't really what they were doing. So you have to know where they're, first off, you got to know what you're asking for what does your story need? And then are they giving that to you? And then you have to decide how much of it do I accept? So be very specific when you're asking for editing. Do you need proofreading, developmental, character? And if you're asking for feedback from somebody, be very specific.
Because you can say, I don't want to change that.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
There aren't, because you
right,
have,
but you don't have to.
Right. Well, sometimes there are discussions of, like I had an example of one real quick. I had one, I'd written a short story that it's a Western, and the horses ride out and they trample something. But I left it kind of vague of what it was, and the editor's like, everybody knows that's the hero's wife's grave, and I was like, yes, everybody thinks they know that. Yes, that's what it is. Yep. But I don't want to tell them right now. I want to tell them at the end because I want it to be this big moment. And then, and then for the audience that already realized it, it's an aha moment for them. But I don't want to. I just don't want to tell them up front. Right. And they were like, okay, fine. So someone told me early on, it's like when it comes to like challenging edits, pick the hill you want to die on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I had a short story, my first short story that was published by people who didn't know me. I had a very interesting run-in with the editor, or one of the editors, and it's an excellent illustration of what you're talking about, because she said, I don't like the word Anglo-Saxon in this sentence because that term is archaic, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And she also said, and by the way, what's the deal with using ibid right here in this other part of here? And I went, okay, first of all, the character is about 800 years old. So she's using that term. That term is there as a hint as to who she really is. Yep. So that needs to stay, because that's completely on purpose. That's not a mistake. And she's like, okay, all right. So right. And then she came back at me with, oh, by the way, I'm also a librarian and you're using the term ibid slightly incorrectly. Can I just fix that? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah.
Stit.
I thought I knew how to format that word. It's not a word, it's an abbreviation. Aha. Yeah. So she was like this, and I was like, yes, ma'am. Okay, sorry. So it's an excellent example of a conversation. Like, this is one email had both of these things in it. And I'm sitting there going, no, I'm the writer. I know my art. And she's like, yeah, but you got your spelling wrong. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Fair enough. But that's good, because there was a conversation.
Yes.
And that's the important thing. It's not just here's some rules, change these, and you go, okay, or no. There is a back and forth. You guys are partners. And I realized I didn't answer your question either. You asked if we did it when in the process an editor comes in. For me, I totally prefer it when I'm done. Mm-hmm. Just because I can be on the last chapter and go, I got to fix something or change something. I love doing things like foreshadowing, or I also like to bookend things. Sometimes something that happens in chapter 1, the payoff is in that very last chapter, and they're very similar. So I may want to go back and do some rewrites. So if they've already gone over and edited that, I might, just to make the process easier, not bother. And I'd rather, wait until all that's done so I can say, here, it's done. And so, yeah.
Okay. Blue, what about you? Do you have a specific point in the process in mind for getting the editor to see your work?
Typically towards the end, but when you develop a relationship with an editor, you can go to him or her when it's in development and say, okay, I got this really great story and it's going really good, but, and it can be a stopping point. It can be a characterization. And usually what ends up happening is I have gotten so focused on wanting to do something like this that I don't see the really cool stuff that's out here. And then what Robin, who's my editor, what Robin will do is say, well, you may want to think about doing this. And she never tells me how to do it. She says, well, what about this? Or I think this character would do that. Or this may be an opportunity. So it really depends on the project. If it's something that is done, I'll send it as a complete package. But if it is something that is in progress, then sometimes you need to solicit feedback. And honestly, as writers, we are so internal, it's good to get an external viewpoint at times. And that can be an editor, that can be a friend, that can be a spouse, that can be a mama, if you can get honest feedback from them. It can be anybody.
Yeah, whenever I get to a point where it's just like, I've written myself into a corner, or I'm just not feeling, or something's just not right, I have author friends. I can call them up and go, hey, let me bend your ear a minute. And I can run it. And a lot of times, that fresh viewpoint will just be like, oh, well, have you thought of this? Ding. Yep. I'm good to go. Thanks. Mm-hmm. And back to work you go. So, yeah.
And I have to say that one of the things that's funny about this conversation a couple of things actually. One of which is that it is, I think, reasonable for us as artists, and we're artists, to have somebody involved in the creation and go, here's something you didn't think about, right? And it's good, and you go, oh yes, it is. It's very good. We this panel is an excellent example. We had a discussion before we started recording, and Bobby basically came up with this idea, and I was like, that's better than what I had. Let's do that. So now that's where we are. It happens, I think, all the time. When you're talking about a 200-page novel, I can see that some authors are like, everybody leave me alone. Don't tell me anything about my characters. But sometimes they give you such a beautiful little piece of characterization or a moment or a tension or a flaw that's so incredibly appropriate that, hey, take it, run with it. Allow that to be part of your process. I think that's a great recommendation. The second thing I wanted to say, because at some point we got to work backwards past the editor before we run out of time. One of the things that I find fascinating about the writing process is there isn't an answer. When I ask you guys about editors, I think I got 19 different variations of the answer.
Yeah.
And this is part of the struggle, but it's also part of the beauty of being a writer is there are 18 different kinds of editors. You need them at different points in the process. I know plenty of people who don't need any help with grammar at all. They don't need a grammar editor. They do need a proofreader because everybody makes goofs every once in a while, even if they know the rules. Everybody every once in a while hits the wrong key on the keyboard. So it is interesting to me to hear you guys basically say, it depends. There's all these options. But also, I think that it's good that we discuss a lot of the different options so people don't come into this process with the misconception that, okay, I'm going to write a 200-page novel and then I'm going to get an editor. No,
Right.
there's more to it than that. But also, it's not bad that there's more to it than that. There's more useful tools in the editing box than just too many comments.
Editor,
yeah, and it goes beyond editing too. There are also people in the production part that may come back with problems, or as you learn what they do in production, we start not making those mistakes in the writing process. You know, like don't leave a space after a period if it's the end of the paragraph. You know, that throws a lot of problems that, you know, learning that, you know, so I've had, if you do this, great, no problem. And so we make their lives easier, you know, which makes our lives easier because we don't have to listen to them come back going, this is wrong, can you fix this? Or
no, that's a very good question. I have a specific example of what you're talking about. Is I wrote a piece of dialogue that's at the end of a paragraph in which one of the characters is yelling the other person's statements back at them. So there's a lot of little tick marks. There's quotes in the quotes, because she is basically yelling his words back at him. And I love that scene. It works well. And then when you format it, it looks terrible. It's almost illegible with all the little tick marks. So I had to get the art crowbar out and make it into a paragraph split so that it was readable. The paragraph breaks were not where I wanted them originally, but the layout on the page made me go, oh no, that's never going to work. I need to force a paragraph break and change it just a little bit so that it was legible, which it never occurred to me until I got into the actual formatting it on the page and saw what software did to all my little quotation.
Yeah, there's a lot of, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, if you want to look at that in the formatting side of it, go into Microsoft Word, go into your options, and then show formatting marks. You should always do it before you send off a manuscript, really anywhere, just to make sure there's no odd things like what Darren's talking about.
Yeah, because there's little, like I said, there's little tricks you can learn. That one helped me a lot, though. And also, someone told me if you know your book size, if you know what size it's going to be printed, go ahead and write that size. Make your pages fit. That way, you don't end up with one line on a page, and that's the end of the chapter. You can
that will happen.
Yeah, and
that will happen.
That one page with three words on it. That's real estate that you're paying for that's not being used.
And honestly, that makes you look like a rookie. I mean, I have to say it, but people pick up a book, and this is, you know, and they want you to open it and see that it looks a certain way. If the book doesn't look like the way that they think it will, that's automatically going to bring it up as amateur, you know? So the sooner you can start paying attention to some of those fine details, the better your product is going to be. And, you know, we're talking a lot about editors this and editors that. We haven't even touched on beta readers. Your beta readers ought to catch. If you have a good source supply of beta readers, they should catch 60% of what the editor is going to bring to you, even before you send it to the editor.
Yeah. So I hate to say this, but we're starting to run out of time. So Blue, can you give us a brief outline of what a beta reader is so people know what you're talking about?
So a beta reader is somebody that reads your novel before it is published. It can be any point in the writing process, but they are someone who gives you immediate feedback on what you're writing. Hey, it doesn't make a sense that this character did this. In this part of the novel, they said this, but now they're saying this over here, or they had the gun in their hand when they walked out into the room, but they didn't have it when they walked out. A beta reader is just somebody that reads it and gives you feedback. And it can be anybody, a friend, a family member, an acquaintance, but there's someone that reads for pleasure and gives you information to make your story better.
So
it's your test audience.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So Bobby, so this next question is for Bobby. When we're talking about beta readers, and thank you, Blue, for the synopsis there. How early in the process do you start thinking about who your beta readers might be? Do you start picking your beta readers, or does that come later?
Yeah, I don't have a lot. I have just a few, so I usually just offer it to them. And but yeah, I kind of have some already. It's been a while since I put out a call looking for new ones.
Okay. Yeah, me too. I've got probably 5 or 6 that I could send a file to today, and I know that they would read it and more than likely give me feedback. And that's another thing. If you send out your book to 10 people and none of those 10 people respond, there's a reason. And it's happened to all of us. There's a reason.
Yep. So then I guess the next question to follow up with that is, would you give a very specific genre novel to all of your beta readers? Would you ask someone, or do you guys even have that? Do you vary in your work enough that you would worry about a beta reader going, I just don't like that because of what the matter is?
Yeah, if they're not a science fiction fan, I'm not going to give them a science fiction novel and make them read it now.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going.
Yeah, you certainly have. And two, what I'll do sometimes, because I like to mishmash stuff, I'll give a book to a reader and say, I want you to focus on the relationships. You like to read about relationships, and you can tell me if something rings hollow. But then again, I have very scientific people that I say, hey, check the science in this. Does it make sense that this science fact turns into this? They keep me from having argon engines, basically.
I like to think of beta readers as a trivia team that, like, every week they go to the same bar and they participate in team trivia, because you've got to recruit a sports guy because you're going to get sports trivia questions. You've got to have somebody who can do a little bit of math and some science because you're going to get those questions. And you've got to have somebody who's young enough that they're listening to the music that's in the trivia questions.
Yeah.
The beta readers seem to me to be very similar in that you want someone who's really going to notice that there's no romance when there should be romance, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a very good point. So as we're winding down here, I want to give you guys a chance to work back to the beginning of the process. When someone comes to you and says, I'm working on my first novel and I just started, is there like a reasonably short list of things that they've got to keep in mind from the very beginning, besides stuff we've already talked about?
Finish it.
Finish it, okay?
Finish it. I mean, honestly, for the first novel, and look, I'm the guy that, I hate to say this, but I'm the guy that published the first novel that I ever wrote. And you can tell it. And I'm okay with that because it was such a great step in my journey, and I learned so much from it. But the main thing about your first novel is finish it and then put it in the drawer. And eventually, as you get 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 novels in, you will see the weaknesses and where you can improve and where you will improve. But honestly, write that first novel, celebrate it, print you a couple of copies, but go on to the next one. your next idea is always going to be better.
Yeah, I don't mind you starting to think about those other things, but yes, finishing it is key. There are more people that have started and never finished a novel than there are people that have finished a novel.
Mm-hmm.
So finishing it should be one of those goals we talked about. You should set. I always tell people you should set goals for yourself, and they should be attainable goals. So for a good goal is finish the book. A second goal is find an agent or find a publisher or whatever because there's multiple paths you can go to this way as well. Once you start setting your goals, you have goals that you can aim for. And then when you meet those goals, celebrate those goals. Finishing a novel, you should celebrate that because it is an accomplishment.
Yep.
It is a big accomplishment. And, and even if it's just your first draft, you finished the first draft. Great. Now let's go do the second draft. You finish that. Celebrate that. These are things worth celebrating. I also tell people you should have fun with it. Writing can be a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But try to write what you enjoy. Don't go, what's popular right now? Because say you hop onto whatever the popular bandwagon is and you're successful, but it's a genre you hate. If you're successful, you're going to be stuck writing that genre for the rest of your life.
Yep.
So don't, have fun with it. Write the stuff you enjoy writing. Enjoy the process. Because if it feels like a chore, you may not want to do it again. Enjoy the process. And if you want, set those goals, decide what your path is, because once you finish the novel, we just talked about selling it to a publisher. There's 12 other paths we could have chosen, from self-publishing to just, I don't even care if it's sales. I just want a book I can give to people in my family and friends, to I just want to put it on a website and let people read it for free, to I want this to be my career. If you know the path that you want to go, you can do things to help you get there. Like I always tell people, if you want to write as your career, you have to treat it like a job. When it's a hobby, you write when you feel like it. When it's a job, you write whether you feel like it or not.
Yep. Every day.
Yes. So it's a job. You get up, you go to work, you do the job, you have goals, you have deadlines, all these things are very important if you want to write as a career.
Okay. So
and that's usually what scares people. That's the part I scare people off with.
Well, so
that's
Blue,
reality.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, guys. So any parting shots for our aspiring writers before we pay the bills and get out of here?
Keep writing.
Keep writing.
Just keep going. And two, you're going to find, and this is the thing that has surprised me, is your life is going to go up, and then it's going to go down, and it's going to go up, and it's going to go down. But your writing needs to be consistent. And there's going to be times in your life where you're down here and you simply can't write. But you can catalog ideas. You can continue to do cons and meet with your writer buddies. You can continue to engage with the professionals that you've built relationships with. So even though it may not always be time to write, there's always going to be a time for writing. And when you realize that, you're not going to be so much on that publication train and have to do this and have to do that and always, but there's always a time for writing.
Excellent.
Yeah, because there's a part of writing, of the writing as a job, like of my writing job, writing is probably a third of what I do to be a writer. You formulating ideas, working through plot problems. Sometimes that looks like me walking around my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things like that. I could be marketing. Me doing this is part of my marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Me being on social media. It looks like I'm just screwing around on social media, but it's part of my marketing. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of things like that we have to do that at the end of the day do not help me add words to the work in progress, but they are very important to the business side of things. Mm-hmm. because this is my business. This is my job. So I have to do all those other things that, man, I wish I could afford to just have somebody else do for me. Mm-hmm. But I can't because I'm just not at that at the place where I can just go hire a staff.
Yeah.
But it's all part of the process.
Well, speaking of the business, we need to get out of here on time if we can. I just want to add really quickly for myself personally, the more that I listen to writers who are published and successful talk about writing, the more I realize that they're not always right for you. Just because a writer says, well, I sold 25 books this way doesn't mean that they're right. It means that it worked for them. So even the three of us have ideas that will not work for you. And that to me is the first step, is to allow that your success is for you to decide. Right?
I will say this to piggyback on that.
Yeah.
One of the best things about, especially the independent writer market, I have run into very few writers that if I say I have a question, will not answer it. Especially meet them, hang out in the bar after a con, at night of a con. Hey, I'd like to ask you about some this is bothering me, or I don't understand this. Can you give me some advice? Most writers are willing to sit down and say, yeah, here's how I do it. And you can learn a lot from talking to other writers.
Yeah.
Especially you start pouring booze into them. And that's coming from me who doesn't drink. But yeah, it's
there's marketing and there's marketing. Okay, guys. So really, let's wrap this up. Speaking of marketing, Bobby Nash, where can people find you on the interwebs now that they know you're worth looking for?
BobbyNash.com is my website. That's a hub for everything. My publishing company, I do have a small publishing company. It's benbooks.com. It's BEN-books. I'm at author Bobby Nash on Facebook. I'm at Bobby Nash on Twitter. I'm Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram. And I'm patreon.com/Bobby Nash on Patreon.
Excellent. Blue, where can people track you down?
Pretty much very similar to what Bobby has, not quite as many. Bluecoal.com, a Blue Coal on Twitter and Instagram. Also on Kindle Unlimited. I have my two newest novels are on Kindle Unlimited, so I'm trying that out. That's my newest thing. Please go check it out. My most recent novel is Elsewhere. It's about a young girl who seeks to protect her brother against feral humans after all of humanity loses their shit. So it's a good novel.
Excellent. And you can find my short stories available for the Kindle on my Amazon authors page under Darren M. Bush. M stands for Monsterama, of course. And speaking of Monsterama, please don't forget that Virtual Monsterama 2020 is benefiting the MPTF, the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which provides temporary financial assistance for needs created or complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic. To learn more and to donate, and please donate, go to mptf.com. That's mptf.com. If it helps, we're talking about the people that make movie and television adaptations out of the books that we love to read. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for participating in Monsterama Virtual this year. And we're going to wave goodbye to everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.